one of the provisions in the disastrous budget bill has already been struck down by a federal court. A judge by the name of Judge Talwani out of the federal court in Massachusetts is finding a provision that is uniquely targeting Planned Parenthood is potentially constitutionally infirm or improper. We don't really have a full analysis of the judge's ruling at this time, but the judge has issued kind of on an emergency basis a temporary restraining order preventing these attacks that uniquely go after Planned Parenthood. One of the things that Planned Parenthood is arguing is that, sure, Congress passed this piece of legislation. This is not one of these situations where Congress didn't even pass a law and Trump is doing something ultra vires outside of the law. The issue is whether the law, as it relates to Planned Parenthood, is constitutional or unconstitutional, because Congress can't pass laws that violate the Constitution. So whether there are First Amendment issues, equal protection issues, Congress can't just single out arbitrarily and capriciously an organization and say, you can't do your work. We're targeting you when you're doing lawful work for the people and singling them out like that. So Planned Parenthood is making an argument across numerous kind of constitutional amendments. First, equal protection clause issues and others. Harry, you could get into it, but the court's basically saying, for now, you can't just go and attack Planned Parenthood in this budget bill. Obviously, this is going to be one of those issues that get appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. But you think about, for example, the attacks that the Republicans would do with the Affordable Care Act. Even though that was passed by Congress, that wasn't just the end of the story. There were right-wing groups that tried to dismantle and rip it apart and actually knocked out some of the provisions from the ACA since Obama had passed it. But the main ACA provisions were kept in place. The ultimate irony is that the disastrous budget bill, which is not framed as a healthcare bill, ends up being a backdoor way of destroying the Affordable Care Act and kicking so many people. I'm melding some concepts there, Harry.
Yeah,
but
the basic theme, though, is exactly right, because it does all these not unintended, but ancillary things. Okay, there's a provision in the big, beautiful bill. Now, it's been against the law for years, the Hyde Amendment. Henry Hyde, a figure who's passed into history, but not his provision that says you can't spend federal money on abortion. So that's already the case. They took it a step further and they said, if you are an organization that primarily does reproductive counseling, family things and the like, and also provides abortion services, you get not a penny of federal money anymore. And Planned Parenthood is saying, give me a break. Why don't they just say, if you're an organization that's spelled Planned Parenthood, this is for us. We are the only ones in the country that we do this primarily, all this stuff, and we also provide abortion services. So as you say, it's not the kind of claim of that Trump has, violated the law with executive orders. This is something Congress passed, but they're saying, first, this is the equivalent of saying no money for Planned Parenthood. And because it's that, they say, first, there's an equal protection problem. That's the argument relative to other providers of services. Also, they say it's reprisal for protected speech, that they're now the whipping child for people, the right wing in the Congress, because of things they've said and where they are on the national landscape. And the law is very clear. It's about the hardest thing for a government to try to justify here in the U.S., which is to actually do a reprisal for protected speech. So if the judge were to find that that's what this is, they would have a huge tailwind for striking it down. Now, on the other hand, those are pretty high standards. Is it really a violation of equal protection? Is it really a reprisal? That's going to be the fight. Now, this is the first, but not the last. Welcome to the United States. You're going to have provision after provision after provision be sued. And what the judge here has done is the lowest level. We've become all too familiar. I say that as a lawyer. All the non-lawyers are way too familiar with the different kinds of stays. But this is the mildest sort of temporary restraining order. There's going to be a hearing, I think, on the 16th and take it up more. In theory, you're not supposed to be able to reverse this kind of order, the United States, but if you can show the Court of Appeals that even though they call it that, it's really the other. But this is the lowest level and the very first time it has happened. And the judge, in fact, gave your being kind and saying didn't fully explain. Basically, it's, yeah, I give a temporary restraining order. In defense, though, it's just for a period of a week until they can take up the actual temporary injunction. But the notion here is, give me a break. You're just trying to get at Planned Parenthood. I think that's probably right. And then the question would be, is that constitutionally infirm for any of a variety of reasons? So that's what's happening now. First one, but stay tuned. There'll be many, many more lawsuits like this filed all over the country on various provisions of the big, beautiful bill.
We're seeing pushback against the disastrous budget bill. We were also seeing, and I think it's worth mentioning because there is a lot of pushback, to Trump pushing through illegal stuff. I think it is worth mentioning here as well that you had this, again, Trump-appointed judge. I'll talk about it in Maryland. Judge Gallagher appointed in 2019 on her own, which we call in the law sua sponte, without even being asked. She says, she sends a letter to the court. She goes, I'm going to take judicial notice of the United Nations report on torture and human trafficking and the worst of the worst conditions in concentration camps across the world. Because according to the UN, COT is one of the places where people go to die. It's a concentration camp. And she, on her own, goes and looks at Judge Boasberg's ruling, an Obama appointee, who's we all know that Boasberg was one of the judges attacked by Trump. And Boasberg, in his cases that he had involving migrants, he took judicial notice of the United Nations kind of report on torture in COT. And so she goes, I'm taking notice on my own of Boasberg. And she says in this letter, either I'm being lied to by the Trump regime or I'm being lied to by the UN and everybody else in the world who says that COT has the most horrific conditions because Trump and Bukele, the dictator of El Salvador, they're out there putting forward declarations and saying things are all great and things are, people have great
prisoners
conditions.
Aren't being harmed. They're just, right.
I'm bringing it up in the context of talking about also these lawsuits, is that if Trump thinks that this stuff isn't going away, or just because he passes a disastrous budget bill, or just because he's getting favors from the Supreme Court, this stuff isn't going away. And Trump is going to constantly be challenged in the courts. And I guess, there is a lot of bad news in the courts that happen when we see these rulings by the Supreme Court all of the time. But I like that it is relentless and people are not backing down and people are saying, okay, Supreme Court, you're going to go here and there. Well, let's test the contours of that. We're not letting you off the hook. We're not going away. We're going to enforce every granular aspect of the law. And I do see signs of hope when I see a Trump-appointed judge in Maryland saying, you're lying to me. Or when I see a lawsuit filed against the disastrous budget bill by Planned Parenthood saying, we're not just going to roll over because you put it in a bill. It's still unconstitutional. All right, Supreme Court, you want to open it up. Think about the implications. Okay, then. So next time the Democrats control the House and the Senate, we should put in provisions in a budget bill that just target right-wing groups, in there and prevent them from exercising their. Anyway, that's why I wanted to talk about that. I'll give you.
Yeah, no, it's really right, and I think it's clear. But these are two different cases where district courts are making clear that the normal, and by normal I mean pre-January 2025. Assumption of good faith and credibility on the part of the administration, it's really been essentially, warned to the brakes are down to the nub, and judges, including Trump judges, as you say, Ben, are not really going for it anymore. And that is a recurrent theme. So as you say, rough opinion that says once district courts have found certain violations, they can't enjoin it nationwide. Okay, but the drumbeat, as you say, continues, and particularly to the extent we are focused on the popular opposition to the Trump regime, the refusal on the part of the public to permit a president who's at 40% to whatever the Supreme Court wants to do to actually decimate the rule of law. That drumbeat is still pretty damn loud. Court after court is not only doing it, but is taking them to task. I'll add, just yesterday in the Abrego case, Judge Zinn is saying, I don't know what you guys are talking about. Talking to you is like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall. Now, you've maybe heard in your extensive litigation career, Ben, defense attorneys get that kind of tongue lashing in a federal district court, but not government attorneys. Their institutional credibility has been worn to the nub and beyond, and that doesn't go away just because the Supreme Court has fettered the ability of district courts to impose nationwide remedies once they find violations.
Harry Littman, you run the Talking Feds YouTube, the Talking Feds Substack, and the Talking Feds podcast. So what that means is you go and search Talking Feds on YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, you search Talking Feds, and Substack, search Talking Feds. I get my legal news from Harry. He was a top official at the Justice Department, top prosecutor at the federal district in Western Pennsylvania. There are very few people with the knowledge. He's clerked for 2 Supreme Court justices. Got to go to the experts. That's why you got to go to Talking Feds. Thanks, Harry.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.